Of course, one of the primary uses of internal and external marketing data is to forecast sales of new and existing products. Now, your book mentions this in the market research chapter and then provides you with one sort of crazy example and then moves on. So let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about forecasting. First off, forecasting is difficult, especially of the future. It's a famous quote, and it's attributed to very, very many different people. Forecasting is not easy. Forecasting, according to the book, well, you have an ongoing firm's view of forecasting sales for an existing product. Here we have sales levels for the past 7 years. See if you can estimate what you think sales might be in 2017. Well, obviously the answer that you might come up with here would be 375 units. But what happens if it's a new venture? Well, then of course it's much more difficult. The basic idea is I want to be able to, so an example of this is the basic idea is I want to predict the sales of a new product, like a UNLV College of Business Executive Education program aimed at the healthcare and banking industries. Well, there would be 4 kinds of estimates that I might want to have. One's a market potential. This is the maximum industry sales attainable under any given set of circumstances. There's the firm or brand's potential, and that is the maximum brand sales attainable under a given set of circumstances. This would be, for instance, how much exec ed business is there out there in the Las Vegas area, and how much of it could UNLV reasonably estimate to be able to get. Then there's the idea of a market forecast. This is the most likely industry sales given a current situation and a given set of plans. So this would be, well, how much exec ed will be consumed by the Las Vegas market over the next year. And then how much of that is likely to be UNLV's. That's called a firm or brand forecast. Basic steps in estimating sales potential. First, determine who buys the product. Then how many buyers are in that potential group defined by step 1. Then estimate the potential purchase or usage rate. Once again, focus on the factors that will affect purchase or usage rate decisions. The value of estimating market potential is you use it for input into brand forecasts, budget decisions, and go, no-go decisions, which are decisions about whether or not, for instance, to introduce a new product or new service like UNLV's Business School's Executive Education program. The book discussed the famous lost horse method, and this is the one that I was talking about that's really relatively bizarre, but let me show you where that fits. Existing approaches to estimating sales. Well, of course, if I have an existing product, I can do a trend analysis, and that was the example I started off with, where we show sales for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, and we just estimate that the trend will continue however it's headed. We could use a regression method. Many of you have taken your business statistics class where you learned how to do some basic regression. You can use that to forecast and build a forecasting model. You can use expert judgments. That is, you can ask people to make educated guesses. You can use a Salesforce composite. That is, you can go through your Salesforce, find out how much they sold last quarter, estimate how many they're going to sell this quarter, and then build a composite forecast, sort of an aggregating forecast from that data. And then another approach is you estimate that my sales this year will be the same as last year, plus or minus some number. And of course, this is really what the book was talking about when they mentioned the lost horse method. What about the existing product tools? Well, there's secondary data, there's past sales data, there's surveys and primary data, there's judgments, and then there's, of course, statistical modeling. Some of the factors that are going to affect our forecast: internal factors, things about, think about Tesla. Well, how many cars is Tesla going to sell this year? Well, some of that depends on how many they can actually build. They are struggling to keep up with demand. There might be industry factors. There might be some things in the industry that are going to increase sales or decrease sales. This is a year that's been very slow for the automobile industry. Some of that is due to macro issues, and some of that might be due to industry-related issues. Then we can also think about customers. They will obviously impact sales in terms of their ability, willingness, and desire to buy our products. And then, of course, competition will obviously affect our forecast. The more the competition, the more it has to be considered in developing our forecast. There are 3 basic new product forecasting approaches. One's called an analogous product. That is, find a product that's close to you, is a close surrogate or close to your product. An aggregating approach, where we start with the smallest basic unit of sales and aggregate that into a forecast. And then there's a disaggregating or chain ratio method, where we start with summary secondary data and break it down to an individual level company forecast. Let's take a look at these three. All right, so what I have here is the famous Jack's House of Dogs, a new product, a new restaurant, and we're trying to estimate what the sales will be for this new restaurant. All right, and so what I have here is an aggregating approach. So I can estimate how many meals I will serve each day of the week, and you can see, so Sunday is 25 to 35, lunch is 40 to 50 to 60, dinner is 40 to 60. And so given this information, I can then estimate how many breakfast, lunches, and dinners I will sell in a day, in a week, in a month, and then in a year. And then if I can estimate how much the average check will be, I can come up with an aggregated forecast. Once again, this is an aggregating forecast because I start off with individual meals, and then I create a overall forecast based on that data. The opposite approach to this is called a disaggregating approach, right? And so this is where I start off with, for instance, all of the Clark County retail sales data for 2010, where I look, for instance, at restaurants. Here you'll notice that I have 1,200 restaurants with average sales of $1,311,000,000, and I have the number of paid employees in the yearly payroll. Well, what I can do is I can take these estimates and I can, for instance, divide sales by the number of restaurants and get an estimate as to what an average restaurant would look. And then I need to add or subtract depending on if I think my restaurant is bigger or smaller than the average. Once again, this is a disaggregating method because I started with total sales of all restaurants for Clark County, and then I tried to break that down into what that would mean for sales of my individual level restaurant, Jack's House of Dogs. The third approach to this is called an analogous product approach. So for instance, we would say, well, we're just like Jack's Pancake House with the following differences. We're 10% smaller in terms of seating. We're located in Boulder City. We're serving meals all day long, different meals for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And so it goes on and on. But the point would be, I can take an organization, or in this case, a restaurant that is similar to mine, and I can use that as a starting point for estimating my sales. And so we've talked about three different approaches: analogous product, aggregating, and disaggregating methods. Once again, forecasting is a data-driven activity, not a guessing activity.